My name is Diana. I'm 32, and I run operations for a restaurant group that serves 3,000 guests a week across 4 locations. I know how a check moves from the kitchen to the table, the way most people know how to tie their shoes. So when my parents called after 3 years of complete silence and invited me to dinner to make amends, there was one question I should have asked before agreeing. Who's really sitting at that table? I never asked. I drove 40 minutes to the Belvedere, walked through the front doors, and found 16 members of my family already gathered around a long table covered with lobster tails, wagyu steaks, and a $400 bottle of Bordeaux they had already started drinking before I even arrived. My father looked up from the head of the table, smiled, and said something I had spent my entire life earning. "You're paying, right? You owe us that much." He thought he had me cornered. What he didn't was that I was about to whisper 2 sentences to our waiter, and that 15 minutes later, his own credit card would reveal something to the entire family. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family situations and walk away with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the person expected to pay, to fix everything, or to stay quiet, this story is for you. Leave a comment and be sure to subscribe. But first I need to go back a few weeks. Before the dinner, before the parking lot full of familiar cars, before my father tried to hand me a bill the size of a mortgage payment. I need to tell you who I was the morning that invitation arrived, because that was the version of me they were counting on. The problem was, I had already stopped being that person. I manage 4 restaurants. I don't own them. I manage them. I worked my way up from bussing tables at a steakhouse in Knoxville when I was 17, still smelling like fryer oil on the school bus the next morning. Hostess at 19. Server at 21, floor manager at 24, regional operations director by 30. I'm not wealthy. I own a paid-off 2-bedroom condo, contribute to a retirement account I never touch, and have exactly 1 indulgence: sparkling water. Still or sparkling? It's what I order every time I eat out. My staff thinks it's a quirk. It isn't. When you grow up paying for everyone else's steak, you learn to keep your own tab small enough that you can walk away from it. That morning, I was sitting in my office reviewing a vendor contract for imported olive oil. The kind of Tuesday that makes you forget not everyone's life runs on spreadsheets and par levels. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. After 3 years of silence, there it was. A notification from the group chat I had been removed from the day I became the family villain. Family had added me back. I stared at the notification for a full minute before opening it. Family. The little red heart emoji my mother had chosen 6 years earlier when she created the chat, back when it was used for Thanksgiving recipes and pictures of Brooke's dog. I hadn't seen that heart in 3 years. The chat history was empty. Nothing appeared above my mother's newest message, which meant they had either deleted everything or, more likely, maintained a second group chat without me the entire time. My mother's message was warm, careful, almost rehearsed. She said she and Dad had been doing a lot of reflecting and wanted to invite me to dinner at the Belvedere so we could begin healing as a family. Just the 4 of us, she wrote. Me, Dad, you, and Brooke. A small dinner, a fresh start. Then, 30 seconds later, a second message arrived with the line that should have told me everything. Family takes care of family, sweetheart. It's time we remembered that. Family takes care of family. She used to say that when I was 19, and she needed my server tips to help pay the electric bill. She said it when I was 23, and Dad needed a co-signer for his truck. She said it when Brooke's first apartment deal fell apart, and I quietly covered the deposit. In my family, family takes care of family had always meant one thing. Diana takes care of family. I read the message twice. I noticed that my mother never said she was sorry. She never said they were wrong. She said it was time to heal. Passive voice. No subject. No one responsible. I typed back. I'll be there. Then I set my phone face down on my desk and returned to the olive oil contract, pretending my hands weren't shaking. 3 years earlier, my sister Brooke decided she wanted to open a cafe. Not because she had a business plan, not because she had done market research. A cafe simply because she had visited one in Charleston, with exposed brick walls and a matcha menu, and thought, I could do that. She was 26, had never managed so much as a lemonade stand, and needed a $75,000 small business loan. The bank was willing to approve it, with a cosigner. That cosigner was supposed to be me. Mom called on a Sunday. Dad sat beside her with his arms folded, already angry before I had even answered. Brooke needed the loan. The cafe was her dream. I had good credit, a stable job, and a long history of saying yes. Just sign the papers, Diana. I asked to see the business plan first. Brooke didn't have one. I asked about projected margins, lease terms, and supplier contracts. Brooke looked at me, as though I had insulted her cooking. Mom's voice turned flat. She's your sister. You don't need a spreadsheet to love your sister. I said no. Not because I didn't love Brooke. I did. But I had spent enough years in the restaurant industry watching people pour their savings into concepts with no foundation. I knew exactly what $75,000 of someone else's debt looked like at 3:00 in the morning when the cafe was dark and the loan payment was still due. Dad stood up. He pointed toward the door and said the words that shut it for the next 3 years. If you won't help this family, you're not part of it. I drove home. Next morning, I had been removed from family. No one called, no one texted. For 3 years, I was the daughter who loved money more than her own sister. Here's the part that's difficult to admit. Silence almost broke me. Not because they were right. I knew they weren't. It almost broke me because I missed being needed. That was the real wound. It took 2 years and a therapist named Dr. Thwan to help me name it correctly. I had been the family fixer since I was 17. My first paycheck went toward groceries. My tax refund paid for Mom's dental work. When Dad's transmission failed, I paid for the rebuild and told him it was covered under warranty, because I knew he would never accept a handout from his 22-year-old daughter. When Brooke got married, I paid for the florist, the photographer, and half the reception. And I smiled while Mom gave a toast about raising 2 strong girls. 2 strong girls. 1 bill. I didn't do those things because I was generous. I did them because somewhere around age 15, I learned that the fastest way to keep peace in my family was to make sure nobody had to ask twice. Ask once. Diana pays. Everyone's happy. Dinner stays quiet. I trained them. I taught my parents that my wallet was a vending machine. Insert guilt. Receive check. And when the machine finally displayed out of order, they didn't try to fix it. They unplugged it and walked away. So when Mom's message appeared after 3 years, family takes care of family, sweetheart, I felt that old reflex ignite in my chest, like a muscle I hadn't used in years. Go fix it. Pay whatever it costs. Make everything quiet again. But I also heard Dr. Kwan's voice, steady as a metronome. You taught them you would always pay. That was your mistake to fix. Not by paying more, but by stopping. My coworker Jess told me not to go. We were sitting across from each other at lunch the day after the invitation when she said, Diana, this has ambush written all over it. I remember laughing, because Jess had never even met my family, yet she saw it more clearly than I did. My sous chef, Marco, said the same thing. Shorter. Don't. But I had already made up my mind. Not because I believed them. Not because I expected an apology. I wanted to sit across from my parents and find out whether 3 years had changed anything, or whether the silence was simply a longer version of the same conversation we'd always had. The one where I was expected to listen, agree, and pay. I wanted closure. Even if closure meant confirming that the door was permanently nailed shut. There was something else too, and I'm going to be honest about it, because I think some of you will understand. I missed my mother. Not the mother who orchestrated things. Not the mother who kept score. The mother who taught me to make cornbread in a cast-iron skillet when I was 9, and sang along to West Dolly Parton while the butter melted. That mother hadn't called in 3 years either. But some nights I could still hear the Dolly Parton. So I told Jess I was going. I told Marco I'd be fine. I told myself the same thing, and almost believed it. I set one rule. 1 dinner, stay civil, no money, and if it felt wrong, I would leave before dessert. I wrote it on a sticky note, and pressed it onto my steering wheel the morning of the dinner. 1 dinner, then home. That sticky note was still there, when I pulled into the Belvedere parking lot and started counting cars. I dressed simply on purpose. Black slacks, a gray blouse I wore to vendor meetings, flat shoes, no jewelry except the small silver watch I bought myself the year I became regional director. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I had earned it. And it kept good time. That felt like enough. I didn't want to walk into the Belvedere looking like I was putting on a performance. My family already believed I flaunted my success. The truth was that I drove a 9-year-old Honda and meal prepped on Sundays like half of America. The drive took 40 minutes. I didn't play any music. My hands stayed fixed at 10 and 2. Somewhere near the highway merge, my stomach began tightening in a way I immediately recognized. Same feeling I get when a walk-in cooler fails on a Friday night, and I know the next 6 hours are going to hurt. Instinct. My body knew something my brain was still trying to negotiate. I almost turned around at the exit ramp. Almost. I thought about that cornbread. I thought about Dr. Kwan's voice. And I kept driving. The Belvedere sat at the end of a row of shops I hadn't visited in years. The expensive side of town. The kind of place where the parking lot is landscaped and the hostesses wear all black. Dad's truck was parked in the third row. Mom's sedan sat beside it. Fine. Then I spotted Aunt Linda's white Buick, Uncle Greg's SUV, Brooks, in hatchback with the bumper sticker from the cafe that had closed 11 months after opening. 3 more cars I recognized. 2 that I didn't. My stomach dropped before I even opened the door. Just the 4 of us, Mom had written. I counted 9 vehicles. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes with the engine off and my hands on the wheel, staring at that sticky note. 1 dinner, then home. The smart thing would have been to back out of the lot, drive the 40 minutes back to my condo, eat leftover soup, and never think again about the Mayfield family reunion I apparently hadn't or had been invited to, without being told who else would be there. But I got out. I straightened my blouse, locked the car, and walked toward the entrance, because I was 32 years old, and I had spent 3 years learning not to run. I wasn't about to start running again, in a restaurant parking lot on a Thursday evening. The front doors were heavy glass with brass handles, the kind that seemed to whisper, "Entrees start at $42, before you even saw a menu. Inside, the lobby smelled like rosemary, warm bread, and money. A hostess in a black dress smiled and checked her screen. "Mayfield?" I nodded. She nodded back. "Your party's already seated." She said it the way hostesses do when they've been managing a large group for an hour and are trying very hard not to appear stressed. I recognized the expression. I had worn it myself 1,000 times. She picked up a menu, just one, and led me toward the back of the dining room. I could hear them before I saw them. Laughter, clinking glasses, and Aunt Linda's unmistakable cackle cutting through the murmur of every other table. 1 dinner, then home. I turned the corner and saw the table. 16 chairs, every single one occupied except for the chair at the far end, directly across from my father. The table stretched the entire length of the private dining alcove. White linens, heavy silverware, candles set in low crystal holders. There were platters I could identify from 10 feet away. Lobster tails arranged over crushed ice, wagyu sliders stacked on a tiered stand, a charcuterie board the size of a coffee table, and in the center, a bottle of wine I recognized from vendor tastings. A 2016 Santa Gru, retail price around $400, already half empty. They'd been there for a while, and they'd been ordering aggressively. The hostess paused at the edge of the alcove and looked at me with an expression that translated perfectly across every restaurant I'd ever worked in. "Good luck." Then she leaned in and quietly said, "Your father put a card down to hold the reservation. Just so you know, we require one for parties over 12. I filed that sentence away the same way I file every operational detail. Silently. Completely. Permanently. His card was on file. He had secured the table, and yet somehow, I already knew the bill was never meant to land on him. My mother saw me first. She stood up with both arms open, and every head at the table turned. "Diana, oh, sweetheart, look at you." Applause. Actual applause. As if I were a returning soldier instead of the daughter they had ignored for 1,000 days. Uncle Greg whistled. Aunt Linda dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin. Brooke raised her wineglass and smiled. The kind of smile with teeth but no warmth. 16 people. Lobster and wagyu. A $400 bottle of Bordeaux. Just the 4 of us, Mom had written. I sat down. What else do you do when 16 people are staring at you? The chair is already pulled out, and a waiter is pouring water into your glass before your purse even touches the floor. I sat down, and I smiled, because 15 years in front-of-house operations teaches you how to smile while your brain conducts a full-speed threat assessment. Mom settled back into her seat, glowing. We wanted it to be a surprise, the whole family together, just like old times. I thought it was just the 4 of us, I said. Mom waved a hand as though brushing away a fly. Well, once Linda heard, and then Greg, and then your cousin Tara, it just grew. You know how family is. I knew exactly how family was. I looked around the table. Dad sat at the head, cutting into a wagyu slider, as if it were Thanksgiving turkey. Brooke sat to his left, phone in one hand, wine in the other, scrolling through something I couldn't see. Aunt Linda and Uncle Greg occupied the middle. Cousins I hadn't spoken to since Thanksgiving 5 years earlier filled the remaining seats. Tyler, Megan, Jake, two wives I had met once, and Aunt Linda's neighbor, whom I had never seen in my life, but who was apparently enjoying lobster at whatever this gathering was supposed to be. The wine flowed freely, the platters were already half gone. They had been there at least an hour before I arrived, and they had ordered nearly everything on the menu that didn't require a second mortgage. Mom leaned across the table and squeezed my hand. See? Family takes care of family. There it was again, the same 5 words, wrapped in the same warmth, aimed at the same target. I squeezed her hand back and said nothing. I was counting plates. My father is the kind of man who orders for the table, not asks, orders. He waved over the waiter, a young guy barely out of his teens who looked powered entirely by caffeine and anxiety, and rattled off additions without even glancing at a menu. Another round of the lobster tails, 2 more wagyu plates, and bring another bottle of that Bordeaux. The Gru. The good one. The good one. He said it loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Dad pulled his credit card from his wallet and held it between 2 fingers like a magician, displaying a coin before a trick. Put it all on this, he told the waiter. We're celebrating tonight. The waiter, his name tag read Nathan, scribbled a note, nodded, and disappeared toward the kitchen, wearing the expression of someone who desperately wanted a smoke break. I watched Dad slide the card back into his wallet and give it a small pat. The way you pat a dog that has performed well. Something felt wrong. I had grown up watching Dad argue over the price of a muffler. I had seen him return a shirt because the sale tag was missing. Raymond Mayfield did not order $400 bottles of wine. He did not wave credit cards around like flags. This was a performance, and it was directed at me. Look how well we're doing, Diana. Look how little we needed you. Except the truck in the parking lot was the same one he'd been driving for 5 years, still carrying the dent in the rear quarter panel he never repaired. Mom's handbag, the coach purse she'd carried since I was in high school, sat beside her chair, the cracked strap held together by a safety pin. They were performing, just didn't know the cost of admission yet. Smaller cuts began around the second bottle of wine. Aunt Linda leaned across Uncle Greg and said, "Must be nice running all those fancy restaurants, while the rest of us clip coupons." She laughed as she said it. The way people laugh when they want you to understand they mean every word. Cousin Megan asked whether I ever felt guilty living so well, while my parents were going through a rough patch. I didn't know about any rough patch. Nobody had told me there was a rough patch. Without looking up from her phone, Brooke added, "She wouldn't know. She hasn't been around." Each comment landed with the precision of something practiced, not scripted exactly, but aligned. The way a choir finds the same note without a conductor. They had been talking about me, about my absence, my money, my life, and they had arrived that night with a shared version of the story. Diana left. Diana has plenty. Diana owes. Aunt Linda finally delivered the thesis statement. She reached across the table, took my hand as though comforting me at a funeral, and said, "Family doesn't keep score, dear." I almost laughed. Family doesn't keep score. Coming from a woman who once stopped speaking to her own daughter-in-law for 6 months over a Thanksgiving seating arrangement. But I didn't laugh. I gently pulled my hand away and lifted my glass. Sparkling water. The only thing in front of me. The only thing I had ordered. The contrast was almost funny. 16 people drowning in lobster and Bordeaux. And me, sitting at the end of the table with a glass of San Pellegrino, looking like the designated driver at a bachelor party. Nathan, the young waiter, passed behind me, and I caught his eye. "Just the water tonight?" he asked quietly. "Just the water," I said. He nodded, as if he understood something I hadn't said aloud. Let me tell you about Nathan. He was maybe 19 or 20. Thin in the way restaurant kids often are, before they learn how to eat between rushes. He moved quickly, but carefully, the way new servers do when the table is too large, the order is too complicated, and they know one wrong plate could lead to a manager conversation they can't afford. I recognized everything about him, because I had been him, 17 years old, 2 tables deep, learning that the guests who snap their fingers are always the ones who tip the least. He was handling our party of 16 by himself. Well, almost. A busser appeared now and then to clear plates, But Nathan was managing every order, every refill, every, "Excuse me, can we get more butter?" from Aunt Linda, who had already asked 3 times in 20 minutes. He never complained, he never sighed. He refilled my sparkling water without being asked. And when he set the glass down, he caught me watching the table with an expression I probably should have hidden better. "Long night," he murmured. I almost told him the truth. Instead, I simply said, "You're doing great." He blinked, surprised, as though he had forgotten customers could say things like that. Then he straightened a little taller and moved on to refill Uncle Greg's drink. I watched him walk away and thought about the version of me who used to carry 4 plates balanced up her forearm and cry in the walk-in freezer on the hardest nights. That girl had no idea she would someday end up on the other side of a table like this, sitting across from the family that turned her into a fixer and a funder, being asked, without being asked, to write one more check. But she would have understood what I was about to do. She would have understood perfectly. I excused myself to the restroom about 40 minutes into dinner. I needed 2 minutes without Aunt Linda's commentary, and behind a door I could lock. The Belvedere's restroom was the kind with cloth hand towels, lavender soap, and a full-length mirror that somehow made you look slightly better than you felt. A useful trick, considering I felt like I was digesting glass. I turned on the faucet and pressed cold water against my wrists, the way you do when you need your heart rate to cooperate with your brain. Then I saw it. A phone resting on the edge of the marble countertop, its screen still lit, the case covered in daisy stickers. Brooke's phone. She must have come in before me and forgotten it when she got distracted. Brooke left things everywhere. It was one of the few traits we shared. I didn't intend to look. I want to be clear about that. But the screen was bright, and the notification banner at the top was from a group chat I had never been added to. The preview text alone was enough to stop my hand halfway to the paper towel dispenser. The group was called Dinner Plan. 3 members, Mom, Dad, Brooke. The latest message, sent 4 days earlier, was from Mom. The preview displayed words I can still recite from memory. "Don't tell Diana it's everyone. She won't dare." The message cut off at the edge of the banner. My pulse stayed steady. My hands stayed dry. I picked up the phone the same way I would pick up a vendor invoice that didn't add up. Not angry, not surprised. Just confirming what the numbers had already told me. I scrolled up. The full message read, "Don't tell Diana it's everyone. Once she's there with the whole family watching, she won't dare say no. She never could handle a scene." Below it, Dad had replied, "Just make sure she sits at my end. I'll handle the ask." Brooke's contribution, time-stamped 2 minutes later. "Order the good stuff before she gets there. Once it's on the table, she can't exactly send it back, lol." I kept scrolling. 3 weeks of messages. Mom coordinating RSVPs. Linda's in. Greg's in. Megan says yes if there's wine. Dad was quieter. Mostly logistics. Parking. Reservation time. How to frame the invitation so it sounded casual. Then I found the messages that made my stomach go cold. Mom, 10 days earlier. The bank called again Thursday. We need to figure out something before June. Dad, Diana can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough. And then the one that landed like a sack of gravel dropped from a shelf. Mom again, 8 days earlier. It's not asking for money. It's letting her back into the family. She should be grateful we're even giving her this chance. Grateful. They wanted me to feel grateful for the privilege of being tricked into a 16-person dinner at a restaurant I never would have chosen, so I could pay for a bill I never ordered, and solve a crisis nobody had told me about. For a family that cut me off the last time I said no. I set Brooke's phone back on the counter, screen down, exactly where I had found it. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in that flattering mirror and thought, I know what you're doing. I know what this costs. And for the first time in 15 years, I am not going to pay it. I stood in that bathroom holding the truth in both hands. And the strangest part was how calm I felt. Not numb, not angry, just clear. The way a kitchen goes quiet, right before the dinner rush. Everything in place, nothing wasted, every station ready. If you're ever discovered that you were loved for what you could provide, rather than for who you are, then you know exactly how cold that tile floor felt beneath my shoes. Stay with me. Subscribe, because what I did next was planned in the time it takes to dry your hands. I walked back to the table wearing the same expression I use when a health inspector shows up, unannounced, pleasant, unreadable, fully operational. Nobody noticed anything different. Aunt Linda was telling a story about her neighbor's divorce. Uncle Greg was working on his third lobster tail. Brooke had retrieved her phone from the restroom and was scrolling again, completely unaware. But now I noticed things I hadn't seen before, or hadn't allowed myself to see. Mom kept glancing at Dad's wallet sitting on the table, small, quick flicks of her eyes, as though she were checking a countdown clock. Dad's laugh was half a beat too loud, the way people laugh when they're nervous and trying to cover it with volume. Second bottle of wine was nearly empty. Nobody suggested slowing down. Why would they? They weren't paying. I was. That was the entire point of the evening. Every lobster tail, every wagyu slider, every pour of that $400 Bordeaux, another brick in the wall they were building around me. High enough that I couldn't climb out without creating the very scene I had spent my entire life trying to avoid. I started asking questions. Casual ones. The kind you ask when you're catching up after 3 years. Not the kind you ask when you already know the answers and are simply watching people lie. How's the cafe, Brooke? Brooke's wineglass paused halfway to her mouth. Oh, we closed. Market just wasn't there. She said it quickly, like pulling off a bandage she'd already practiced removing. That's too bad. How long did it last? 11 months. Mom stepped in before the silence could settle. Brooke's exploring other options. She has so many talents. I nodded. Then I turned to Dad. How's the contracting business, Dad? Still doing the commercial builds? His jaw tightened for half a second. A tell I had catalogued long before I was old enough to drive. Between projects right now. Economy's been tough. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I knew because 10 minutes earlier I had read the bank called again Thursday on his wife's In's phone. And because the dent in his truck was still there. And because the man who had ordered 2 rounds of lobster and a $400 bottle of wine was sitting across from me, performing financial stability the way a community theater actor performs. Shakespeare. Loud, committed, and completely unconvincing to anyone who has seen the real thing. I simply nodded and let them keep talking. People tell you everything when they think you're the bank. They told me about the kitchen renovation they had put on hold. About the vacation they had decided to skip this year. About how things had been a little tight, but nothing they couldn't handle. Every sentence was a window into a house I could now see was on fire, while everyone stood on the lawn, pretending the smoke was barbecue. The pressure started building the way it always did in my family. Not through a direct question, through a current. Small comments moving in the same direction. Casual enough to deny, coordinated enough to trap. Aunt Linda sighed and said, "It must be so rewarding doing well for yourself like that. Some of us aren't so lucky." Cousin Tyler, whom I hadn't spoken to since Obama's second term, chimed in. "Yeah, Diana, you really landed on your feet. That's awesome." Even Uncle Greg, who usually communicated almost entirely through sports metaphors, managed. "You hit a home run out there, kid." Each compliment was a brick, and every brick pointed in the same direction. You have money, we see it, and we're reminding you in front of witnesses. Mom conducted the whole thing from the center of the table, like someone who had memorized the score. A nod toward Linda, a smile at Tyler, a gentle hand on Dad's arm whenever he seemed ready to speak too soon. She was good. She had always been good. I used to think my mother was simply a warm person who enjoyed hosting. Now I understood she was a project manager with a 20-year track record, and her biggest deliverable was sitting at the end of the table, drinking sparkling water. The dessert menus arrived. Aunt Linda ordered crème brûlée without even glancing at the price. Brooke requested the chocolate soufflé, which required a 20-minute lead time, meaning she had ordered it before I ever sat down. Of course she had. They were running up the tab the way people do when someone else is paying. Without a ceiling, without guilt, without a single glance at the prices on the right side of the menu. My sparkling water was down to the ice. Brooke was the one who finally cracked the surface. By then she had consumed 3 glasses of Bordeaux, enough to wear down whatever filter normally existed between her brain and her mouth, which had never been particularly thick to begin with. She leaned across the table, glass in hand, and grinned at me, as though we were sharing a private joke. "Relax, big sister. It's just dinner. You can afford it." I set down my water. Afford what? This. She gestured around the table. The platters, the wine, the 16-place settings, the crème brûlée and chocolate soufflé, currently being prepared by a kitchen that had no idea it was catering a shakedown. "We ordered the good stuff since you're treating." She said it so casually, "since you're treating," as though it had already been decided in a meeting I wasn't invited to, which of course it had. The table went quiet, about 3 seconds. Which doesn't sound like much until you're the one sitting in it. Mom shot Brooke a look that clearly said, too early. Brooke shrugged as if she had merely bumped into a vase she never intended to pick up. Uncle Greg studied his lobster. Aunt Linda suddenly became fascinated by her napkin. Dad cleared his throat. The silence lasted long enough for Nathan to arrive with a fresh bottle of sparkling water and place it beside my glass. And long enough for me to realize two things. First, Nathan was the only person at that table who had given me something without expecting anything in return. And second, Brooke had just confirmed out loud what every person in the room already knew. I was the mark. This entire dinner was a heist, and every lobster tail was evidence. What happened next was an accident, and I almost felt bad for cousin Megan when it happened. I think she was genuinely trying to make conversation. Megan was the one family member who had sent me a birthday text during the second year of silence. A short, thinking of you message I never replied to and still felt guilty about. So Diana, Mom said you got a big promotion. Something about running a bunch of restaurants now? I kept my answer simple. Regional Operations Director. 4 locations. Megan nodded, impressed. That's amazing. Like you're in charge of all of them? Staffing, vendors, compliance, financials? Everything from the loading dock to the check. I said it the same way I would in a meeting. Factual. No polish. But the word financials hit that table like a rock through a window. Aunt Linda's fork stopped mid-air. Uncle Greg looked up from his plate for the first time in 10 minutes. Brooke's scrolling thumb froze. Even Dad shifted in his chair, reassessing, recalculating. They knew I was successful. They had built the entire evening around the assumption that I was successful enough to pay. But hearing it out loud, the scope, the authority, the specifics of what I actually did, was different from simply assuming it. They had pictured me as a well-paid waitress who got lucky. They had not pictured someone who could read a P&L statement faster than they could read a menu. Someone who managed vendor contracts worth more than their house. Someone who knew exactly, down to the cent, what 16 lobster tails and 2 bottles of Gru, Bordeaux cost before the check ever arrived. The table recalibrated. I could feel it happening like a shift in barometric pressure. The power hadn't changed hands yet, but it had loosened. Dad waited until dessert. I'll give him that. He was strategic. The soufflé had arrived. The crème brûlée had been cracked. The second bottle of Bordeaux sat upside down in the ice bucket. The table was warm, full, and slowed by sugar and wine. Every face carried that particular satisfaction that comes from a meal you didn't end for, and don't intend to. Dad set down his fork. He folded his hands on the edge of the table, a gesture I had seen before. Before signing contracts. Before giving Thanksgiving speeches. Before telling me at 23 that he needed a co-signer. Just this once. He looked at me. Not unkindly, not cruelly. With the expression of a man who genuinely believed he was being reasonable. Diana, he said with a smile, you're paying, right? You owe us that much. 5 words. You owe us that much. 16 people heard them. Nathan, refilling Aunt Linda's coffee behind me, heard them. Couple at the next table, pretending not to listen, heard them. My mother nodded. My sister smirked. My aunt reached for another pat of butter, as if the matter had already been settled. You owe us 3 years of silence. Not one person at that table had said they were sorry. Not one person had admitted they were wrong. Not one person had said they missed me for any reason other than my credit limit. You owe us that much. I looked across the table at my father. Table covered in the wreckage of a meal I hadn't ordered. Surrounded by family members I hadn't been told were coming. Holding a glass of water I had poured for myself. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because the decision I had been afraid to make had just been made for me. I didn't answer immediately. I've learned that silence often does more work than words in a room full of people who are accustomed to being agreed with. 3 seconds. 5. The kind of silence that makes a table of 16 shift in their chairs, reach for water glasses, and suddenly discover something fascinating on the wall behind you. For 15 years, I had paid so nobody would make a scene. I picked up every check, co-signed every loan, covered every deposit, every dental bill, every florist invoice, because the cost of saying no was a room exactly like this one, full of staring faces, expectant faces, faces carrying the unspoken understanding that Diana's love was measured in dollars, and Diana's silence was purchased through compliance. 15 years, thousands of dollars. And the price of admission to my own family had just been announced to the room at roughly $80 a plate, plus wine, plus lobster, plus the special tax that comes with being the child. They only call when something needs funding. I looked at my father's hands, still folded, still steady. I looked at my mother's eyes, still warm, still performing. I looked at Brooke, who had already gone back to scrolling because, as far as she was concerned, this was settled. I looked at Nathan standing near the service station, watching with the careful attention of a portent was happening at his table, but wasn't it entirely sure what. Then I looked at my sparkling water, half full, reflecting candlelight like a small, quiet promise I had made to myself. I placed my napkin on the table. I smiled. "Let me go take care of things," I said, standing up. Mom exhaled. Aunt Linda patted her chest. Dad unfolded his hands. Every one of them thought I was going to pay. So here's the thing. 15 years behind a host stand teaches you something. The person who controls the check controls the room. My family believed they controlled it. They had set the table, chosen the restaurant, ordered the menu, assembled the audience, delivered the demand. They had 16 people, 2 bottles of wine, and 3 years of built-up pressure on their side. I had 2 sentences and a waiter named Nathan. If a quiet boundary has ever changed your life, if you've ever walked into a room where everyone expected you to fold and you didn't, hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this one lands. I didn't walk toward the front register. I walked toward the service station at the back of the dining room, where Nathan was organizing. Check presenters, and a floor manager named David was reviewing a ticket. David wore the standard uniform, black shirt, black tie, earpiece, and carried the look of a man who had been in the industry long enough to handle whatever walked up to him. I approached him. "Excuse me, David." He turned with a professional smile. "How can I help?" I kept my voice low, not dramatic, not conspiratorial, just the volume restaurant people use when dealing with something that doesn't need the attention of the entire dining room. Nathan stood beside him, listening, eyes attentive. A tray rested against his hip. Both of them looked at me the way hospitality professionals look at someone who speaks their language, with immediate, focused attention. I said 2 sentences. "I'm not the host, and I won't be covering this table tonight. Please bring the full check to the gentleman at the head of the table, the one whose card is already on file for the reservation." David blinked once. He glanced at Nathan, then back at me. "And one more thing. Split off just my sparkling water onto a separate check, and add 30% to mine. For your team. You've earned it tonight." Nathan's eyes widened slightly. David looked at me for a full 3 seconds, reading the situation the way a good floor manager reads every situation. Quickly, thoroughly, without judgment. Then he nodded. "Done." That was it. No argument. No hesitation. No, "Are you sure, ma'am?" David had been in the business long enough to recognize a redirect when he saw one, and Nathan had been watching that table long enough to understand exactly why one was needed. I paid my bill immediately. 1 sparkling water, 2 refills, and a 30% tip. It would probably be the largest tip Nathan had received all month. David ran my card, handed me the receipt, and quietly said, "I'll present the table's check in about 10 minutes, once the dessert course clears." Perfect. I returned to the table, sat down, picked up my water, and took a slow sip. Brooke was arguing with Cousin Tyler about a reality show. Aunt Linda was telling Uncle Greg about her neighbor's fence dispute. Mom watched me with the careful attention of someone who believed the check had already been handled. Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, completely satisfied. 16 people eating dessert, drinking the last of a $400 bottle of wine, waiting for a bill they had no intention of seeing. I set my glass down and waited with them. Those 10 minutes were the most peaceful part of my evening. The table didn't realize it yet, but the meal was already over in every way that mattered. The food was gone. The wine was finished. The request had been made, and the answer had already been delivered, in a language none of them spoke. I sat at my end of the table and listened to my family talk. Aunt Linda complained about the price of mulch. Uncle Greg told a fishing story that never seemed to reach an ending. Brooke took a selfie with the remains of her soufflé. Mom laughed at something. Cousin Megan let out a real laugh, the kind that crinkled her eyes and, for exactly 3 seconds, made her sound like the woman who used to sing Dolly Parton in the kitchen. I almost felt something. Almost. But then I looked at Dad. He was checking his phone beneath the table with the tight-jawed concentration of a man waiting for a text message he didn't want to receive. And I remembered what I had read on Brooke's phone. "Diana can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough." My sparkling water caught the candlelight again. I watched the bubbles rise and burst one by one. Tiny implosions nobody noticed. I thought about 17-year-old Diana in her apron, balancing 4 plates along her forearm, and learning how to smile through the ache in her shoulders. That girl would have paid. She would have pulled out her card, covered the entire table, called it love, gone home, cried in the shower, and never told anyone. I wasn't that girl anymore. Nathan appeared at the edge of the alcove. Before he took his first step, I already knew exactly which chair he was walking toward. He placed the leather-bound check presenter, embossed with the Belvedere logo, directly in front of my father. Not in the middle of the table. Not near me. Directly in front of Raymond Mayfield, the man who had made the reservation. The man whose card was on file. The man who had announced 2 hours earlier, put it all on this. The conversation at the table died like a candle caught in a draft. Dad stared at the leather folio for 2 full seconds. I could see the gears turning. The check was supposed to go to Diana. The check was supposed to go to Diana. The check is in front of me. Mom's eyes widened. She looked at me, then at the check, then back at me. And for the first time all evening, her composure cracked enough to reveal the calculations running behind it. Diana, she began. Dad recovered first. He was good at recovering. He had spent 63 years refusing to admit when he was caught off guard. He picked up the check presenter, opened it with a casual flick, and deliberately did not look at the total. He couldn't look at the total. If he looked at the total in front of 16 people, the performance would be over. I've got it, he said, pulling a credit card from his wallet with the same 2-finger flourish he had used earlier. He handed it to Nathan without breaking eye contact with me. We're celebrating, remember? Nathan accepted the card. I'll be right back, sir. He said it gently. The way you speak when you know what's about to happen, and the person you're talking to doesn't. Dad leaned back, crossed his arms, smiled at me with the complete confidence of a man who believed his credit card would save him. Nathan returned 4 minutes later. He stood beside my father's chair. Then he leaned down and spoke at a volume intended to be discreet, but easily heard by a table that had grown quiet enough to hear ice melting. I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined. No one moved. Dad's smile remained for 1 more second. A reflex. Like a light that stays on after the switch has been flipped. Then it disappeared. Run it again, he said. Nathan nodded. He walked away. 2 minutes later he returned. The same posture. The same gentle tone. I'm sorry, sir. It's still not going through. Would you like to try another card? Dad reached for his wallet. His fingers moved through the card slots. 1 card, then another, then a 3rd card pulled from behind his driver's license like a final bullet he had forgotten was still in the chamber. He handed it to Nathan. The table remained silent. 16 people, no forks moving, no wine being poured, no laughter, only the sound of Raymond Mayfield's, to 63 years of pride, compressing into a wallet he suddenly couldn't close fast enough. Nathan returned a 3rd time. He didn't need to say a word. His face said it all. Dad looked at Nathan. Then he looked at me. Not with anger. Not yet. With the raw, unguarded expression of a man who had just realized, in front of every person who mattered to him, that the safety net he had been counting on was gone, and the ground was exactly as hard as he had always feared. He looked at me the way you look at a lifeboat pulling away from a sinking ship. I picked up my sparkling water, took a sip, and set it back down. I don't owe you. I never did. Dad's chair scraped against the hardwood floor, with a sound like tearing paper. Diana. His voice was low, controlled, trembling around the edges. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Dad. Your card was declined. That's between you and your bank. You were supposed to. He stopped himself, but not quickly enough. The unfinished sentence hung in the air, visible to everyone. You were supposed to pay. Mom started crying. Not the quiet kind. The performative kind. The kind with gasps, dabbing eyes, and enough volume to gather sympathy from nearby tables. After everything we've done for you, after I carried you, how could you sit there and... What did you do for me, Mom? My voice remained calm. I didn't raise it. I didn't lean forward. I stayed in my chair with my hands wrapped around my water glass. Tell me, in front of everyone, what did you do for me in the last 3 years? Brooke slammed her hand onto the table. This is so typical. You always have to make everything about you. Aunt Linda reached for my arm. Diana, dear, your father is clearly embarrassed. Can't you just... No. 1 word. I said it the same way I would say it to a vendor who tried to short an invoice. Clear. Final. Without apology. Then Dad broke. Not with anger. With something worse. His voice dropped, and for one brief, terrible, honest moment, he sounded like a man standing in a dark house after all the lights had gone out. Diana, please. We're drowning. I saw him. I saw the frightened man behind the performance. The father who had lost his business and his pride and couldn't admit it out loud until his credit card admitted it for him. I saw him, and it hurt. Then he added, and you'd let us. And the hurt disappeared. Because even while drowning, he was still reaching for my wallet instead of my hand. I stood up. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. The way you stand when your decision is made, and you no longer need the rooms, just permission to leave. Dad, I'm sorry you're struggling. I mean that. But this. I gestured toward the table. The empty platters. The overturned wine bottles. The 16 faces staring at me, as though I were the villain in a story they had rehearsed all week. This isn't asking for help. This is a trap. You didn't invite me here to make amends. You invited me here to make a payment. Mom's crying hardened into something sharper. That's not fair, Diana. We just wanted you back. You wanted me back for what I could cover, Mom. I read the messages. She can cover us through spring. The table went pale. Brooke's face drained of color. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad stared down at the tablecloth. If you need help, real help, I'll sit down with you and a financial counselor, and we tune. No tricks, no audience, no lobster. But I'm not paying this bill. I didn't order it, I wasn't told about it, and I don't owe it to you. I paused. I don't owe you. I never did. No one spoke. I picked up my purse. Then I looked at my mother and said the last thing I would say to her at that table. You always told me family takes care of family. So why was I the only one who ever did? Then I walked toward the door. Past the busser. Past the hostess. Past the heavy glass doors with the brass handles. Nathan caught up with me near the coat check. Ma'am. He was holding my receipt. Thank you, he said. Quiet. Sincere. I touched his shoulder. You're doing great, I told him again. Then I walked out. The parking lot was quiet. A warm Thursday evening. Cicadas humming in the landscaped trees that made the Belvedere look like it belonged somewhere more important than a strip mall. I sat in my car with the engine off and the window down and looked at the sticky note still attached to my steering wheel. One dinner, then home. One dinner. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the family group chat. Messages were already pouring in. Mom, Aunt Linda, Brooke, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, everyone typing at once. A flood of exclamation points, accusations, and the particular kind of outrage that only comes from people who have been caught. I didn't read any of them. I scrolled to the bottom, tapped Leave Group, and watched the confirmation appear. Diana has left the chat. I set the phone on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove home in the same silence I had driven there. Except this time, the silence wasn't anxious. It belonged to me. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No one called that night, or the next day, or the day after that. The group chat continued without me. I know because cousin Megan, the one who had sent the birthday text, reached out separately a week later. I just wanted you to know, she wrote. That was the most honest thing anyone's done at a family dinner in 20 years. I'm sorry I was part of it. Megan was the only one who apologized. 3 weeks later, Brooke texted me, not to apologize, to ask whether I could lend her first and last month's rent for a new apartment. I replied with the name of a financial counseling service and wished her well. She never responded. Through Megan, I learned the rest in pieces over the following months. Dad's contracting business had collapsed 18 months before the dinner. 2 bad bets on commercial projects had gone sideways. Mom had been making minimum payments on 4 credit cards using a home equity line that was now completely maxed out. The house went on the market in July. They moved into a smaller rental 30 minutes south. Brooke got a job answering phones at a dentist's office. None of it was what I wanted for them. All of it was the result of choices they had made long before I walked into the Belvedere, and none of it was mine to fix. I did what I had promised at the table. 6 weeks later, I called Dad and offered to sit down with him and a financial counselor. He hung up. I haven't called again, but the offer still stands. I learned that the most expensive thing you can buy is other people's comfort with your silence. And the night I stopped paying for it was the night I finally became rich. That's my story. 16 seats, 1 glass of water, and a credit card that told the truth nobody else would. If you've ever been the family bank, hear me. Helping is a choice, not a debt. And a boundary doesn't have to be loud to be unbreakable. Thanks for watching. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.